Without fail, at least a few times per month, if not more, some clever Christian in the comments thinks that they have the ultimate gotcha, and they quote incorrectly and weaponized and out of context to me one of my favorite books, The Brothers Karamazov. I have it right here. We're going to get into this just a little bit today with this one mistranslated quote that, hey, without God, everything's permitted. Usually in their point of atheist are all immoral nihilist, and you have to have God to be righteous, and if there was no God, everyone all the time would be running around raping and killing, etc., which is ridiculous. It's not at all what Dostoevsky meant, which anyone who has actually read the book would know. That's the other thing that cracks me up, is I can tell it's someone who heard some other Christian school some other atheist with this line. They're like, oh, that's good, I'll use that. And considering that it's typically Christians who are always screaming context and you don't know what you're talking about and you didn't read it correctly, it's hilarious to me every single time this happens. So let me give you the full quote. And it's hard because it's a paraphrasing in general. We never get this exact quote. There's about 3 sections in the book where we see this come up pretty early on. We get the initial framing from Ivan, who's kind of the token atheist. That's a really bad description, but for these purposes, it will do, of the story. We have his very faithful brother, Alyosha. Except, I'm sorry, the conversation with Alyosha comes before the Grand Inquisitor. This first one, I believe, is with Dmitri. And then we see it at the end, kind of a callback, because one of the believing characters in the story commits murder and uses this line back at Ivan as if it's what he meant, which is how we get the clarification that that's not what is meant. It is a slight warning that abstract philosophical or theological concepts can be weaponized by people, used as excuses for the bad they were already going to do. Notice it wasn't Ivan the atheist who committed the murder here. But again, it shows up in different parts. The closest we can get is this, but there's nuance here that I want you to hear. And I promise we won't spend all this time. I know this isn't everyone's flavor dissecting these texts. We are going to get to the big part, which is the hypocrisy of the Christian. How it's actually within Christianity that everything is permitted. So hang tight for that. But in a better translation and the correct source, it is without God, or in a godless world, might be more fair. And there's always the second condition they leave out, the immortality of the soul, which just means the afterlife. And then there's a question mark, because this is the theological, philosophical wonderings of someone who is tormented by suffering in the world and wrestles with the concept of morality. Okay, under those conditions, would it be true, or doesn't that mean, is what's in the text, that everything is permitted now, that one can do anything? This is about removing the bounds of religion. In one of the quotes, I think it's in the earlier chapters, he follows it up with even cannibalism. And I think that helps us understand the context a little better here. And Dostoevsky did this a lot, where he would use the most extreme version of a moral taboo to kind of test the grounds of the thinking. Cannibalism has a lot of deeply religious reasons why it is absolutely wrong, the consumption of human flesh. In a system without God, there might be a rare and extreme case where something like cannibalism, or if you don't want to go that extreme, although that is the one used in the book, other people often cite collateral damage as another way to view this. But let's stick with the cannibalism. If there's no God, there's no afterlife, there's not some weird, horrible punishment for doing this thing, it doesn't mean everyone should go out and eat people. It means that there's no bounds. There's no actual divine command that makes it intrinsically wrong. I forget the details, but there's this story of men that were shipwrecked that resorted to eating each other to stay alive, and the survivors that made it back only because they had consumed the flesh of their already dead companions. It's not like they murdered them to do it. When they got back, they faced a ton of criticism. That's a very rare and extreme situation where, unless there's some actual divine taboo with some divine consequence in another life, it made sense and it could be morally justifiable. Now, you don't have to like that if you're a believer. Heck, even if you're a non-believer, that's still going to probably give you the ick a little bit, right? But do you see the distinction that's drawn there? Well, if there's no God, there's no immortality of the soul, then certain things in certain circumstances can become acceptable that otherwise, under this faux idea of divine command, wouldn't be. And again, it's not even empirical. He's still just trying to think about this. He's questioning it. In the same way, it's amazing. I should actually just do a series about misunderstood and taken out of context philosophical quotes that are weaponized by Christians, because there's so many. The most popular one that comes to mind is the one from Nietzsche, that God is dead and we have killed him. They see this as some kind of an atheist mantra. We're so excited we killed God. No, we don't believe in God. And Nietzsche was wrestling with the idea of, as the God belief disappeared more and more in society, it would be replaced. What are we going to replace it with? Is that going to be good or usable? Will there be this hard kind of growing pains of accepting that? And it was more about questioning, not does that mean we should hold on to God, or does that make God real? Of course not. It was just a real conversation about the different potentials that come under a removed superstitious worldview that up to that point had mainly been the grounding for certain ideas within that culture. Also, this is coming from a character in a story that is fiction. People talk about the genius of Dostoevsky, which I agree with, but then they attribute this quote as if it was him. No, he wrote it for his atheist character who is contending again with these ideas, not espousing them. And even then, it still feels to me in some respects the way that he wrote Ivan is kind of the way that domineering men have often written their female characters, not authentically. And there's many parts that bug me with Ivan in the story, but that's fine, because I'm sure there's parts that bother Christians about Alyosha. It's still okay for that author to get to make these decisions. So again, you can see how incorrectly the Christian weaponizes this kind of a quote, how irresponsible they are with this. And it comes with quite a few problems. One is that it does indeed misrepresent atheist as immoral or all negatively nihilistic, that they can't even have morals or do good, which is insane and not a view that Dostoevsky held. It also ignores all these secular moral systems that have been put in place and have been utilized, whether it is secular humanism or utilitarianism or virtue ethics, etc. Like the Christian, especially the Western Christian of today, has a really small view into other cultures and in history and even into other religions. And all they can see is their Judeo-Christian values that make them morally superior to the rest of the backwards world or the heathen Satanist atheist, which is the most hilarious oxymoron that never seems to dawn on them. Again, because they're using Satanist as in someone who worships Satan, not in kind of the ironic stance of freedom that it's often represented as. And yeah, it also assumes that morality can only be grounded in some kind of divine command theory, which is like the most immoral system I can think of. And it is what leads to everything actually being permissible. So let's go ahead and dive into that. As fun as it is for me to talk literature and philosophy for today's purposes, I really wanted to show why Christian morality fails. So here's the flip side. You're probably familiar with the term divine command theory. If God commands it, then it's good, then it's moral. Now, of course, there's the Euthyro dilemma, which is it good because God commands it, or does God only command what is good? And that's interesting. We can play with that another time. And many Christians will try to get out of this, but when pressed, they kind of have to say, God can do no evil. God can do no wrong. It is in his very nature. He is goodness himself. Then you can try to point out the bad things that are done in the Bible, the commanding of rape as punishment, the commanding of enslaving the nations around you because they're not you, the commanding of genocide, including the killing of women and children and animals. Those things in that context, if commanded by God, are now all of a sudden good. They were bad a minute ago when we were talking about the Holocaust. They were bad a minute ago when we were talking about the transatlantic slave trade. Now, when God commands it, it's good. That's the definition of under X, everything is permissible. Under God becomes our X, everything is permissible. I dare you to name one thing, morally speaking, that you think is wrong, that's not like hyper-specific, like stealing Bitcoin. It would just be stealing then. Name one thing that's wrong that God hasn't done or commanded. Maybe blasphemy doesn't work there, but again, that's only wrong within the spiritual sense. I'm talking about collected, agreed upon, we'll call it rule of law, naturalistic morality that most people of most cultures of most time have agreed upon. Because of course there's nuance in all of that. Feel free to put in the comment and I'll give you a verse. We'll play with that here at the end also. So yeah, Christianity 100% allows and or permits or makes permissible moral atrocities. There's no doubt about it. Also, and people get confused because the connotation of this word is so positive, but forgiveness-based ethics is also highly problematic. So Hitler can go to heaven if he repented. A child rapist who accepts Jesus on their deathbed is spending eternity in paradise. But a moral atheist is damned. Now, I know that all sounds cliche, and I know the horrendous apologetics that try to get you out of that. But this is indeed the system, where someone that exterminated 6 million of God's chosen people can be at the feet of God right now. And just to continue to be as cliche as possible, someone like Gandhi is burning in hell. That, by definition, actually permits evil, or a less spiritually charged word, harm. Because if repentance wipes the slate clean in the eyes of God for the acceptance of the better part of the afterlife, while virtue does not, because it's not as good as belief, then you've quite literally said what you do doesn't matter, which Christians know and love. It's what they hang their hat on. Christianity is so unique. You can know it's true, which doesn't follow, because it's the only religion that's not about you and what you do. It's about God and what he does. Oh, so it has absolutely nothing to do with our moral actions. So it's the one religion where literally you can do anything and still go to heaven. It's a religion that incentivizes belief over behavior. Like, maybe I'm dense. Maybe I'm dumb for thinking this is such a huge point, even though I am aware how cliche it is. But some things are cliche because they are so true and obvious, and then can be denied for those same reasons, which is silly. Again, I'm going to beat this dead horse. A serial killer who delights in taking the life, something that is supposedly so valuable to God and this religion. Make it as gruesome and as messed up as you want, who wears their skin, who cannibalizes their flesh, who rapes them both before and after death, is rewarded, while the humanitarian of the year is punished based on not morality, not actions, not who they helped or how they lived their life or even followed God's law, but by belief. This moral framework quite literally permits all behavior as long as you say the right thing or believe the right thing at some point in your life. Now, there's Christian doctrine debates about once saved, always saved, or whatever. But if we just take Jesus and the man on the cross next to him, this is a man that had no time to actually repent, which usually is a change of mind, heart, and direction, meaning action. All he could change was his mind. All he could do was confess. All he could do was say the right word. And Jesus says, truly, I tell you today, you will be in paradise with me, even though Jesus didn't go to paradise that day, whatever. So there's just no accountability for God's chosen. There's just truly all things being permitted. Paul calls himself the chief of sinners, but he ends up revered within this religion. The chief of sinners. By his own definition, he's a greater sinner than me, the horrible atheist. In fact, he even says, I know what to do, and still I don't do it. Now, he's complaining, he's frustrated by this, but it's a normalization of sin. For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Oh yeah, we're all sinners. It is letting yourself off the hook. It is a normalization of bad action, of evil, because who can be perfect? Even though Jesus says, be perfect like my Father in heaven is perfect. Christianity permits moral failings as much as you want, as long as you can wrap them up into God's plan somehow later on, even just theoretically. That we're all sinners is used as a shield. So it doesn't matter what you point to. You can point to the text itself. You can point to the patriarch. You can point to the founders of the religion. You can point to the institutions, the very religious leaders and authorities that helped and encouraged things like the Crusades and the Inquisition, or more recently, all the child abuse scandals. Yet the system persists, protected by divine authority and the human fallibility of man. You tell me who has made more excuses that everything is permissible? The moral atheist who doesn't have, yes, the ultimate divine accountability of the afterlife, and yet still chooses to do good, still tries to alleviate suffering and harm. Oh, but he's doing it for the wrong reasons. What the hell is that? What's a more wrong reason for doing something than being afraid of your God burning you in hell and wanting all the pleasure he promises you in heaven? You remove the carrot and stick and someone still does well, and you have the gall to call them the immoral one? And by the way, I'm not trying to say there's no moral Christians. I am combating the hypocrisy here. There's also definitely immoral atheist, because we're all just people. But instead of grouping people into Christian and atheist and only Christians can do well or be moral and no atheist can, I see the actual nuance of the situation. So hopefully that's coming through clear. Again, this is not atheists are good, Christians are bad. That would be stupid as what the Christians who make these kinds of remarks to me are trying to communicate. The inconsistencies in the Christian worldview around this are absolutely mind-boggling. I have no way of justifying horrible things like killing children, sex trafficking, genocide, rape, or slavery. I can't do it, but the Christian can, and they do often. And if you want proof of that, I've been watching too much of my buddy Deconstruction Zone. You can start with the most nice, pleasant conversation, this Christian who is just here to represent God's light and love, but then they're forced to deal with the text. This is what Justin is so good at. And without fail, they have to end up concluding, well, he's God. He can do what he wants. Got it. Which is gross, because if you follow that train of logic, and if we could prove to them right now that Yahweh is absolutely fake, the Bible is absolutely not valid, and that the real God is Allah, that the Quran is correct, how many of them would start doing things that yesterday they said the Muslims were doing that were terrible and wicked and immoral? Your morality is essentially up for bid by whichever deity actually exists and or has the most power. That's not morals. That's not ethics. That's a slave mentality of sickness. So maybe to get ahead of some of the examples that I asked for, I'm going to make a list really quick right now of some of the worst things hopefully all of us could agree might be immoral, and then show you where God either did it or commanded it. And I wanted this to be a shorter video, so I'm probably setting myself up for failure because I'm not going to go into great details explaining the context behind all of this or why it's prescriptive and not descriptive. The greatest excuse for the Christians. You can do the research. Go look at these verses and just see my point. Here it is. Everything is permissible by Christianity, because as long as it's Yahweh who's doing it or commanding it, what can they say? They've already claimed that he is by nature good, perfect, loving, and just. You really shot yourselves in the foot. So let's do this. Okay, we're going to go fast. First, let's do slavery. So maybe the better thing to do is for each of these, ask yourself if you can be this honest, knowing that I'm definitely providing some leading questions here. If you think this thing is wrong, is it wrong to own other people as property for life and hand them down to your children as inheritance? Yes or no? We're talking ethics. We're talking morality. I would say that slavery is always wrong. It's a subjective opinion. I'm basing it out of empathy and society building. So you don't have to like that, but I can say it's wrong. Can you? And if you can, then explain this. Leviticus 25:44-46, as for the male and female slaves whom you may have. This is from God himself. You may have them. You may buy them. It is from the nations around you that you may acquire male and female slaves. You may also acquire them from among the aliens residing within you. These you may treat as your property, passing them on to your children after you as a possession for them to inherit. You may treat them as slaves permanently. Now, I've heard every last excuse, and I have tons of videos on it, but this is your God, Yahweh, an immutable creature who cannot change, who is by his very nature good. And here he is saying, hey, as long as you don't do it to your own, which I'm going to give you special permission for later and how to do that, but go buy them. But Brandon, what about kidnapping laws? See, I knew I wasn't going to be able to do this without getting into all of the apologetics, etc. Yes, there are kidnapping laws to ensure that your property is protected. And that also applies to the slaves you buy. You didn't have to kidnap them. You could buy them. So to me, the horrible atheist, slavery is wrong. To God, permissible. Therefore, to Christianity, at least you could say sometimes in some situations with some groups of people at some point in history, this immutable God thought slavery was okay. Okay, I won't go that deep on all of them, but I just want you to get this. Let's do another fun one, genocide. 1 Samuel 15:3 says, "Now go and attack Amalek and utterly destroy all that they have. Do not spare them, but kill both man and woman, child and infant, ox and sheep, camel and donkey." This is a command to Saul to do this, by the way, and we know it's not hyperbole because we get context. We get the end of the story. Saul doesn't kill them all. He leaves the king and a few goats or whatever to sacrifice as a gift to God. And that is where Saul loses his throne. It'll take a little bit, but now the anointing is going to go to David, who will commit genocide to the full letter of the law for his God. Well, Brandon, you just don't understand the context of the day. You don't understand how evil these people were. Yada, 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 yada. If you have to make excuses like this for actual genocide, the murder of innocent animals, children, and women, thank you for proving my point. Everything is permissible, including number 3. Rape. We see God command rape as punishment, like with David's wives. But he also commands rape or sexual slavery, which would be rape, in wartime. Suppose you see among the captives a beautiful woman with whom you desire to want to marry, and so you bring her to your house. After she has lived with you a month, you may go in her and be her husband. Oh, but he waited a month, and they used the pretty word that Christians love, marriage. Okay. So, if China right now invaded the US and killed every single man and boy, and all that were left were women, and you heard a general shout through the loudspeaker, "Hey, any of the women you think are attractive, they're yours. Take them, make them your wife, go into them." But wait a month. The month wasn't to allow them time for mourning. It was to ensure another cycle passed so that they weren't going to raise a child of their enemy. That's it. I can only imagine what other horrible things were done to them during that month before they could consummate their marriage. Now, I'm doubling down on this one because it was covered in genocide. But what about child killing? Exodus 12:29, "At midnight, the Lord struck down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt." Brandon, not all firstborn are children. Duh, but some are in the land of Egypt. "From the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on his throne with a hardened heart from God and no free will, to the firstborn of the prisoner who was in the dungeon, who had nothing to do with the conflict, and all the firstborn of the livestock," and I guess animals now too. It's funny because that story is always told as God killing adult children who belong to the rulers of the court, as if that justifies any of this. But the reality is spelled out in the verse. God's killing children, and he's fine with it. It's permissible. So is torture. Let me give you a New Testament verse to spice things up here. Luke 12:47, "That slave who knew what his master wanted but did not prepare himself or do what was wanted will be beaten with many blows." This is Jesus describing what a master will do without condemning it, by the way, just acknowledging that this is what happens, which we can also see as just condoning of slavery in general as well. And we have many Old Testament verses as well that show that it was totally within the norm and accepted and permissible. By the way, just to be clear, again, God has either done or commanded all of this. With the exception of the verse I quoted in Deuteronomy, that was Moses speaking, I think, if I'm not conflating, after he convenes with Yahweh. And then further in the book, it says that this is what Yahweh has commanded. So, I mean, yeah, in that particular verse, it doesn't say Yahweh commanded, it says Moses said, but context, remember, you got to read before and after. Okay, surely human sacrifice could just never be permissible. And I could give my Jephthah example, even though the Christian has such bad excuses for it, it's hard to listen to. But what if we just use that time where, I don't know, God sent his own son to be sacrificed? The amount of times I have heard that this God doesn't approve of human sacrifice, and then the Christian to turn around and thank God for sacrificing his human son. Oh my gosh, can you not see it? Female subjugation, I mean, we could use Paul in the New Testament, but we don't want to do that. We want to use God. Oh, I know. How about the curse he gave to Eve? We always talk about the childbearing curse. But if you actually read Genesis 3:16, to the woman he said, "Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you." Not only commanded from God, instilled as a curse from God. So you can't even try to twist it and say, no, it doesn't. It's actually a good thing, right? Like we have different roles and she's a helper. No, this is after he created the helpmate. This is after the fall. Sin has been ushered in, and her curse is now to be ruled. What about lying? Now, you might think there's certain instances, and so do I, where lying is permitted. But when did God choose to lie? Was it to help scare Jewish children when Nazis came knocking at the door? Which is the example that we usually give as a good time to lie. No, it's just to win a battle. 1 Kings 22:22 through 23, "I will go out and be a lying spirit in the mouth of all his prophets, the Lord said. Then he said, you are to entice him, and you shall succeed. Go out and do it. So you see, the Lord has put, who? The Lord has put a lying spirit in the mouth of all of these your prophets. What about stealing? Man, that's like pretty obviously not okay. Not only do we have God stealing people's lives and stealing their land and stealing their income and all kinds of things like this, but even after he hardens the hearts of the people in Egypt who could stop the plagues, the disasters from coming, but he doesn't want that. He wants to prove his power so that all of Egypt will worship him, which also doesn't happen. And he also afflicts all of these plagues on sometimes his own people and all the time all the Egyptians. If those 10 plagues actually happened, the chaos, havoc, despair, and downfall of Egypt would have been insane. And yet, as a parting gift, when he leads his people out, Exodus 3:21-22, when you go, you shall not go empty-handed. Each woman shall ask her neighbor for jewelry of silver and gold. Oh, but he said ask. That's not stealing. Yeah, it's not like this is a totally coerced position, but it gets worse. And you shall put them on your sons and your daughters, and so you shall plunder the Egyptians. Where do you think they got all the gold to make their idol? What they stole from their captors after God tortured them, after he removed their free will. And I don't know how many I've done, and I could do so many more, but I'm going to do a fun one to end. I'm going to do cannibalism, because that was, again, one of the quotes. Even cannibalism is what is stated would be permitted if we don't have God or the immortality of the soul. And I gave a situation where I think it could be permitted. But then in context, especially the way Christians weaponize this quote from the book, that would mean cannibalism would not be justified in a God system. And yet, Leviticus 26:27-29, but if, despite this, you disobey me, this is God speaking, and continue hostile to me, I will continue hostile to you in fury. I, in turn, will punish you, myself, sevenfold for your sins. You shall eat the flesh of your sons, and you shall eat the flesh of your daughters. That sounds a lot like God not only making cannibalism permissible, but using it on his own people as punishment for their disobedience. See, again, bad atheist Brandon would say, even in times of war, even in times of severe disobedience, it would never be okay to purposely make children starve to death so that you put their parents in the horrendous situation of only being able to stay alive by eating the flesh of their sons and daughters. Damn. God needs like a Geneva Convention. But that's it. That is what you get when I finally reach a breaking point on seeing the ridiculousness of this stupid, incorrect quote misused and weaponized by supposedly the moral ones. So, thanks for being here. I will see you Tuesday with hopefully finally either one of two big videos that I've been wanting to do. The Chosen Last Supper video, or I think the next comment section video we're going to do where we reply to Christian comments will be on the one raising money for the victims, the Christian victims of what happened in Texas with the flooding. Boy, did Christians not like that. Until then, keep thinking. I wanted to personally thank my top tiers of support, my Iconoclast, Ann, Boris, Grant, GVI, Jimmy, Joe, Kitboga, Matthew, Perry, and Shawn, my Humanist heroes, Craig, James, Jarrod, Kristi, and Matthew, my Atheist advocates, Aquitar, Caleb, Dan, David, Drew, Jeff, Jeffrey, Julie, Malcolm, Paul, Sparky, and Thomas, as well as all of my secular scholar patrons. If you believe in the mission of this channel, please consider joining these fine people.